After a failed attempt in 2024, when ferry strikes from Quebec forced us to turn back, this year we set out with unfinished business. On July 25, 2025, the mission was clear: complete the Trans Labrador Highway once and for all. Our route was ambitious, first crossing Newfoundland, then riding north to L'Anse Meadows before doubling back for the ferry to Labrador. From there, we'd follow the coast and ride the legendary Trans Labrador Highway through to Quebec. Finally, we'd continue into the Maritimes, exploring New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia before catching the ferry home to Newfoundland. Over 5,000 kilometers of road, rugged landscapes, and an adventure to remember forever. Overnight, we had made our way across the Atlantic back to Newfoundland. The rugged coastline and rolling hills looked beautiful on this particular morning. These familiar shapes rising from the sea were a gentle reminder of how spectacular Newfoundland is. And as we made landfall, it was hard to believe the journey was nearly over. Trips like this are the reason many of us ride in the first place. Not just for the scenery or the machines, but for the clarity you get when the road becomes your only responsibility. Life simplifies, the noise quiets, and somewhere along the way, you start seeing things and yourself a bit differently.
Off the ferry in Argentia, Newfoundland.
Once docked, we rolled our bikes off the ferry and headed toward home. The ride from the Argentia ferry terminal to St. John's is short, just 130 kilometers, and a far cry from the 500-kilometer days we had become accustomed to. Yet it felt significant. After nearly 2 weeks on the road, crossing provinces, islands, and thousands of kilometers across all kinds of terrain and weather, this final stretch was a quiet reminder of how far we had come. There's something about being on the road for almost 2 weeks that strips things down to the essentials. Wake up, ride, explore, and solve whatever problem the day throws at you. It's only now, looking back, that I realize how many small challenges shape this trip, and how much they remind me of everyday life. Out here, the stakes feel higher, but the lessons are the same. Focus keeps you upright on loose gravel. Determination gets you through those long, empty stretches where kilometers don't seem to move. Clarity of thought shows up when a decision has to be made quickly, about weather, fuel, timing, or just which road feels right. And solid decision-making, well, that's what gets you safely from one day to the next. The further we rode, the more obvious it became that adventure riding is really just life in a more concentrated form. Every challenge is immediate, every reward is earned. Every problem demands your attention. Not tomorrow, not when things slow down, but right now. And when you finally reach the end of the loop, you realize the same approach carries you through the ups and downs off the bike as well. Every long ride leaves a mark on you, whether you notice it in the moment or only once you're home again. Somewhere between the ferries, the gravel, the endless horizon lines, and the quiet mornings, this trip changed me a little. It reminded me how big Eastern Canada really is, and how small the little things we worry about day to day can feel when you're surrounded by nothing but wind, road, and time. This trip taught me that preparation matters, but flexibility matters more. The road always throws surprises, and that's half the fun. Looking back now, the miles almost blur together, but the memories don't. As the kilometers slipped away and home grew closer, I found myself mentally rewinding the journey, day by day, replaying the moments that stood out, the roads, the challenges, the laughs, and the unforgettable scenery, all of it rolling back through my mind. Day one started with a change of plans, with us leaving St. John's a full day early to avoid a major rainstorm. The gamble paid off and we made it to Gander dry, rolling in before the first bands of rain caught up with us. It was a smart start to what would become an epic adventure. On day two, we waited out the last of the rain before getting back on the Trans-Canada and heading west. Our destination was a friend's off-grid cabin, the perfect mix of quiet, wilderness, and a place to recharge. And after a stormy start, it felt like the trip had officially begun. Day three took us up the northern peninsula, stopping at the provincial arches and riding through the dramatic landscapes of Grossmoor National Park. By late afternoon, we reached Lanza Meadows, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where we stepped back 1,000 years to explore the recreated Viking settlement, one of the most memorable stops of the entire trip. Day 4 started with doubling back for the morning ferry to Labrador, and once across, the scenery shifted immediately, wide open, rugged and raw. We stopped at the towering Pointe-Amour Lighthouse, the tallest in Atlantic Canada, and then the Pinware River Bridge, and despite the vulturous black flies, managed to capture it with the drone. By evening, we rolled into Red Bay, toured the Whalers Museum, and spent the night in a converted fishing shed right on the water. It was another unique day for the books. Day 5 was a big one, 540 kilometers from Red Bay to Goose Bay, almost entirely through endless wilderness, long stretches of remote landscapes, and a couple of graded bridges that make the bikes dance just enough to keep things interesting. We arrived in Goose Bay by early evening, and after a good meal, sleep came easy. Day 6 was another long haul, 530 kilometers from Goose Bay to Lab City. It started sunny and dry, but before long we were right back in the thick of rain, thunder, and lightning. It was a big kilometer day and one we definitely felt in our bones. Day 7 marked the milestone, the end of the Trans Labrador Highway. It was cold, around 5 degrees Celsius, with a -1 wind chill, and the mix of dirt, mud, and steady rain early in the day kept us fully focused. But the highlight was the Manic 5 Dam. Standing beside that gigantic structure and capturing some drone footage felt surreal. By the time we reached Bay Como, a hot pizza and a couple of beers felt like a proper celebration. Day 8 took us from Baie-Comeau south along the St. Lawrence. A beautiful ride with sweeping views and smooth pavement. We crossed 2 ferries that carried us across the river and deeper into Quebec before finally landing in Amqui. There we found a perfect little roadside motel and capped the night with pasta, red wine, and a few laughs. A simple ending to a perfect day. Day 9 started with a ride through a historic covered bridge, a postcard scene come to life. We spent most of the day sticking to the secondary roads, eventually crossing the Centennial Bridge into Miramichi. Supper and a few beers at Mike's Bar and Grill wrapped up a relaxed, easygoing day. Day 10 took us from Miramichi to PEI under bright skies. We crossed the quirky Shediac Bridge and made the long sweeping run across the Confederation Bridge, nearly 13 kilometers riding over open ocean. No matter how many times you do it, that crossing never stops being magical. Day 11 came after a couple of easy, much-needed days recharging in Charlottetown. Under perfect sunny skies, we rode south toward the Wood Island Ferry, an effortless morning where everything felt just right. After crossing into Nova Scotia, we made our way over the Canso Causeway and the Seal Island Bridge. With the drone up, you can see those steel arches rising over the Brador Lakes, one of the longest and most impressive spans in the province. We checked into our hotel, dropped the gear, and wandered out onto the deck overlooking the ferry terminal. It felt like the adventure was shifting gears, winding down, but not quite over. Day 12 gave us one last gift, a ferry that didn't leave until 5:30 p.m. That meant time to soak in Cape Breton before the final push home. Our first stop was Point de Crony, where the original lighthouse once stood. From Point de Crony, we followed the shoreline of the Brador Lakes towards Groves Point. Hugging that winding coast felt like riding through a postcard. We stopped here and there, just taking in the moment before eventually heading to the ferry terminal for boarding. And once on the ferry, we grabbed a cold beer and headed to the top deck to watch Cape Breton fade behind us. It was our last sunset away from home. As the last memory flickered past, the mental film strip snapped back into place. And just like that, I was back in the present, finishing the final stretch toward home. Arriving home always hits harder after a big loop like this. There's a gratitude that settles in, not just for the landscapes or the roads, but for the fact that everything went right enough for us to experience all of it. You feel it only when the helmet comes off at the end of the last day. And as I look back over 13 days behind us, I'm reminded why these trips matter more than I sometimes admit. For many adventure riders, completing the Trans Lab isn't just a trip, it's a rite of passage. The remoteness, the gravel, the emptiness. It tests you and your bike, but it also rewards you with a sense of accomplishment that's hard to match. As I finally rolled into the driveway, that feeling blended with something else, the familiar itch for the next adventure.